Dan Carter is the World Player of the Decade. World Rugby had a vote. Don't know if you guys saw it. It was online. People could vote to see who should be the World Rugby Player of the Decade. The final was Dan Carter up against Richie McCaw. In fact, all the four final choices were all Kiwis. So if you haven't seen the bracket, it started off Aaron Smith against Dan Carter, Farrell against Sexton, Guinea against Bowden Barrett, Nono against Habana, Kieran Reid against Warburton, Sam Warburton, Pocock against Alan Jones, Parise, Retallick, and McCaw and Tawera. And it ended up with McCaw and Carter facing each other off for World Player of the Decade. And Dan Carter ended up winning it. I've written down a few of his kind of career highlights, I guess. And you guys can tell me whether you think it should have been him or Richie. I always lean towards Richie just because he was the captain. And he's kind of your one club man. He didn't go off and take money abroad and all that stuff. So he just seems like the ultimate Kiwi. Like it's kind of what I guess they think he should be. But anyway, so Dan Carter, World Player of the Decade, has 2 Rugby World Cup wins in 2011 and 2015. Even though if he wasn't available through all of 2011 through injury, which is probably another thing which maybe would edge me towards Richie, is that in terms of his fitness, Richie McCaw was often a lot more available and at times played through pretty bad pain, especially in that 2011 campaign. But either way, over his career, 9 Tri-Nations and Rugby Championships, 112 tests, 99 wins, 1 draw, 12 losses. He scored 29 tries, 293 conversions, 281 penalties, 8 drop goals for a total of 1,598 points. In the decade, he had the World Rugby Player of the Year award twice. He won it 3 times overall. So this is just between that decade. I think it was 2005, 2012, and 2015. It's really 2005. Or 2008. Can't be 2005. That must just be my handwriting. But yeah, he was a pretty bloody good player. And you look at a lot of guys who played 10, and there are some who are great kind of goal kickers and distributors, good with the boot from hand. And there are other guys who are great ball runners and a focal point of a lot of attacks and whatnot. But Dan seemed to be a good blend of everything. He could do everything pretty well. So I can kind of see why you would give him Player of the Decade. If you look at McCaw's career in comparison, 148 tests, which is still number 1, 131 wins. That's pretty impressive. 110 of those games as captain. So phenomenal. Player of the Year in 2010, 2009, and 2000, and I think that's 6. Again, my handwriting is pretty poor. 27 tries, so just 2 behind Dan, although he did play a lot more games. And again, 2 Rugby World Cups. Played more of those 2011 and 2015 games than Dan did. But again, I would say he was fit, but he was at least fit enough to play, even if he was partly injured. So yeah, I mean, my New Zealand heart would probably say you should go with Richie, because like he's just the ultimate. But can't complain with it going to Dan. The fact that they beat out Bowden Barrett and Kieran Reid, I can live with that. At least in New Zealand terms, I think Carter and McCaw are probably a cut above. But yeah, that's a lot of New Zealand guys in the votes. It's probably a bit tough. I mean, you could say that, McCaw and Carter both had careers which spanned both sides of the decade. Like Habana maybe had some of his better years before the turn of the decade. I'm not sure what his stats would be like if you break it down year by year. But either way, both these guys kind of hit it off halfway through the decade. So nobody from 2015 onwards was really able to take them over, which says a lot for what they are. I thought for a minute as well, of course Dan gets it because he's a 10, and 10s always get the awards more than other positions. But if you look at Player of the Year, which both these guys have won 3 times, there's been 19 times it's been awarded, 7 times to a fly half or a first 5, which is definitely the most, but flankers are actually second with 6, although 3 of those are Richie. I think Dusautois, Peter Steff, and there was one other who had it as well. But yeah, not as lopsided as I thought it might have been. But yeah, there you go. Dan Carter, Player of the Decade. What do you guys think of that? I still haven't seen his movie. I've seen it advertised. It's still $20. I'll wait till it comes on special. But yeah. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think on Dan Carter as Player of the Decade. I can't help but think who might emerge for the coming decade. It's probably far too early because there may be guys who will be contenders for it in 10 years' time who we haven't even heard of yet. But cheers, guys, and yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.